Good evening. I am Ashton Van Dyke. My professor is Melanie McNair, and I wrote a paper on hurdles that transgender people face in mental health and what we can do to help. And then I made a video presentation, and the format is based on ASAP Science videos. So just give me a second and I'll pull it up.
Mental health is a universal issue, being a popular topic for music, film, and television. In fact, the World Health Organization labeled depression as the leading cause of disability worldwide. However, people from certain backgrounds are at a greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in their life. For example, a 2011 survey of 6,500 transgender and gender nonconforming people found that 41% had attempted suicide, as compared to 1.6% the general population. The same survey found that a quarter of the participants had abused alcohol and other drugs. Now, in an ideal world, these statistics shouldn't have to exist. Of course, an immutable and very human quality should not make anyone more predisposed to take their own life. If we want to strive for a better world, we first must find the roots of the problem. In a general sense, transphobia, or prejudice against transgender people, is the source of these proverbial roots. A study on transgender veterans found that transgender veterans living in states that lacked anti-discrimination laws and employment were 26% more likely to experience mood disorders and 43% more likely to self-harm than those living in states with those laws. Another study on transgender women found that, among this group, that there was a correlation between being a victim of physical violence and engaging in suicidal behaviors. There is also found to be a correlation between being a victim of sexual violence and engaging in substance abuse. This in itself is alarming, but it gets worse when you consider that transgender women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience violence and discrimination than the rest of the population. So what can be done? Legislation can aid in minimizing the acts of discrimination that trans people face daily. One form of legislation that can be passed is anti-discrimination laws. Considering that, as of 2016, 32 states still lacked anti-discrimination laws for LGBT people. Some argue that anti-discrimination laws are ineffective in that they don't eliminate prejudice. Others argue that, in regard to employment, that if an employee or applicant were to sue, it might be difficult for them to prove that discrimination even happened. Obviously, passing anti-discrimination laws will not completely get rid of transphobia in our society, and they are not necessarily an airtight guarantee that discrimination won't happen. However, they have been shown to influence the decision-making of employers. In 2009, researchers showed 255 human resource managers 2 applications and asked if they found one of the applications to be more favorable. One application would be from a man coded as LGBT. For example, the resume would say that he was awarded the Gay and Lesbian Alumni Scholarship from his school. The other resume gave similar qualifications but was not coded as LGBT. About half of these managers lived in states with anti-discrimination laws for LGBT people, while the other half lived in states without these kinds of laws. HR managers who lived in states without anti-discrimination laws were less likely to evaluate the gay applicant as hireable, while HR managers living in states with anti-discrimination laws evaluated both resumes similarly. Passing anti-discrimination laws in housing and employment would certainly be a step in the right direction in reducing instances of transphobia and in improving the mental health of the trans community. However, we also need to consider laws regarding the change of gender markers on legal documents. A major factor in instances of anti-trans violence is that trans people are often barred from sex-segregated facilities, such as homeless shelters, prisons, and rehab centers, that correspond with their gender identity. Take into account the case of Dee Farmer, a transgender woman who was placed in a men's prison in the 90s and was subsequently raped and ended up contracting HIV. These types of facilities generally go off of what a person's legal gender is, with birth certificates being a common form of documentation. Amending birth certificates can be incredibly expensive. For example, in North Carolina, trans people are required to undergo sex reassignment surgery and have to have a doctor's note before they can legally change their gender marker. This is especially unfair to those who are at a lower income level, as transition-related surgeries are expensive and are not covered by most insurance companies. Also, some trans people might decide not to pursue surgery at all for personal or medical reasons. Though many trans people do end up pursuing some form of surgery, they shouldn't have to be required to have surgery in order to be safer from violence. 14 other states have laws similar to those in North Carolina, while 11 states lack explicit laws on amending birth certificates. Meanwhile, Tennessee law explicitly prohibits trans people from amending their birth certificate at all. Minimizing the requirements to amend birth certificates could potentially place trans people at a decreased risk of becoming victims of violence. For example, California law dictates that all someone would need to amend their birth certificate is a doctor's letter. Mental health both reflects on the condition of a population and contributes to it. The statistics on mental health in the trans population indicate a dire need for change. Laws might not eliminate prejudice from society, but legislation such as anti-discrimination laws and reform birth certificate laws would certainly be a step in the right direction. By doing our part in voting for pro-LGBT legislatures, by contacting our local congressmen, and educating other voters, we can create a better tomorrow.